What if Doctor Strange was played by Nicolas Cage? Or what about Joaquin Phoenix? Not only that, what if the film was written by Back to the Future writer Bob Gale? Or was made as a horror film by the writing and directing duo behind Blade, David Goyer and Stephen Norrington? Or what if Guillermo del Toro took a crack at it too? Believe it or not, all of these things almost happened, as Doctor Strange went through decades of development before finally making it to the screen. To find out how we went from all of that to the movie we got, let's dive in and take a look at what could have been Doctor Strange. Between scripting these videos and sticking to my upload schedule, I spend a lot of time sitting at my desk, but I always make sure to make time for the gym. I've noticed though that as I've gotten older, my body just doesn't snap back like it used to. Plus it's a lot easier to put on fat, especially around my waist. And that's because testosterone levels for most guys naturally start dropping as early as our 30s. And if that's happening to you too, you might want to look into Mars Men. It's a natural supplement designed to support healthy testosterone levels, which can help your body burn fat more efficiently and build lean muscle. Plus, it's not packed with synthetic hormones or weird stimulants. It's built with natural ingredients, made in the USA, and every batch is third-party tested. But if you're still on the fence, they've got a 90-day money-back guarantee. Worst case scenario, you don't love it, and you just get your money back. But best case scenario, you join the thousands of guys who are already feeling incredible results, since over 91% of users are reporting higher energy levels. For a limited time, our viewers can get 50% off for life, plus free shipping and 3 gifts at mengotomars.com. That's mengotomars.com for 50% off and 3 free gifts when you check out. And it's also available on Amazon. After you purchase, when they ask you where you heard about them, don't forget to please support our channel and tell them that we sent you. Hot off the heels of Back to the Future, writer Bob Gale was asked if he wanted to take a crack at writing Doctor Strange. Marvel Comics had been a huge influence on him growing up, so when his agent told him that they were looking for a writer for Doctor Strange and that Stan Lee was involved, Gale jumped at the chance. And what he came up with was not only surprisingly comic accurate, but in some ways shockingly close to the Doctor Strange movie we'd eventually get decades later, except with a few key differences. Gale's script opens 700 years in the past, focusing on an Ancient One and a student Tiro, as they attempt to stop a tribal priest and his cult from summoning Dormammu to Earth through human sacrifice. Tiro and his master manage to stop the ritual, but not without a cost, as his master dies in the process, before passing the mantle on to Tiro. Dormammu, meanwhile, vows revenge before being sucked back through the dimensional portal. From there, the story jumps to 1980s Manhattan, and that's where this script starts to resemble the movie Marvel fans would eventually see in 2016. However, in this version, Baron Mordo betrays and nearly kills the Ancient One, resulting in Stephen Strange becoming the Elder Sorcerer's new apprentice, and through that journey begins to grow into a better, more selfless man. But when Mordo seeks revenge by attempting to open a dimensional gateway that will allow Dormammu to enter Earth and conquer humanity, Strange is forced into a mystical battle that tests whether he's truly worthy of the title. One of the coolest sequences in the entire script sees Strange's astral form return to Earth, only to discover that his physical body has been kidnapped by a pair of Mordo's goons. As a result, Strange's astral self has to race across New York City trying to find his own body before it's too late, because in this script, if the astral self is separated from the body for more than an hour, both cease to exist. It's a kind of sequence that would have delivered not just wild visual effects, but a real sense of urgency and panic too. Of course, Gale was also writing within the limitations of the time, as he later admitted they simply didn't have all the money or technology to do all the dimension hopping, reality bending, Ditko style imagery from the comics, so he had to ground much of the action on Earth. So what went wrong? At the time, Marvel was in the middle of serious financial instability, as the movie rights to Doctor Strange kept getting bought and sold between different companies. Gale did additional drafts once the IP ended up at New World Pictures, but then New World went south too, ultimately killing this version of the film. When the film was finally made decades later, Gale would remark that it was shockingly similar to the bones of his script, except for the casting of Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One, which he criticized for both whitewashing and gender swapping the character. After this, writer-director Alex Cox, best known for Repo Man, heard that Francis Ford Coppola's company American Zoetrope had to deal with Marvel to develop their properties into scripts, so he approached them with the idea of doing Doctor Strange, which he would end up writing with the one and only Stan Lee, in what Cox would later call the best thing he ever wrote during this period. Their story would have taken place at the turn of the millennium in New York City in 1999, with the Earth on the brink of ecological collapse. At the center of it all is Mordo, a powerful billionaire who runs Mordo Industries, a corporate empire accelerating deforestation, ozone depletion, and global environmental destruction, which we later learn he's doing to pave the way for Dormammu. And that's because Mordo isn't just a businessman, he's a fallen sorcerer, once trained alongside Doctor Strange under their master, Norland Kendall. But now, Mordo has turned to dark forces. When he sends demons to steal the Book of Ashanti, they target Strange, now a public paranormal expert appearing on talk shows and writing books. Kendall warns him that Mordo has become a conduit for Dormammu, who plans to invade Earth during an eclipse just 3 days away. At the same time, Tanya Anders, a former weather forecaster who is always right with her predictions, is driven to the brink by apocalyptic visions, including a voice screaming Dormammu's name. Seeing Strange on TV, she turns to him for answers. As Strange and Tanya investigate Mordo's growing power, a psychic battle erupts across New York. Soon after, Kendall, Strange's master, is killed, leaving Strange to take his place as Earth's last line of defense. As the eclipse begins, Mordo captures Tanya and brings her to Easter Island, where the Stoneheads tear open reality itself, creating a gateway to the Dark Dimension. Strange's astral form arrives, enters the gateway, and confronts Mordo in a fierce magical duel, who realizes too late that Dormammu doesn't want to rule Earth, he wants to destroy it. At the climax, Tanya transforms into her past self, the ancient sorcerer queen Nefertiti, unleashing a surge of power that seals the breach and stops Dormammu. So what went wrong? Since American Zoetrope was producing, there were talks about Coppola's nephew, Nick Cage, aka Nick Coppola, playing Doctor Strange. To finance it, Zoetrope tried partnering with Regency, but their distribution partner Warner Brothers were in a dispute with Marvel Comics at the time over merchandising, and they refused to be involved, ultimately dooming the project. The closest we ever got to a Doctor Strange film during this period, though, was the B-movie Dr. Mordrid, which has long been rumored to have started as a Doctor Strange adaptation before the producers lost the rights and were forced to rework it to avoid copyright issues. But that's not actually what happened. In reality, the producers brought in legendary comic artist Jack Kirby to develop original characters for them, one of which was a sorcerer character he called Dr. Mortalis, later renamed to Dr. Mordrid. That said, while it wasn't directly based on Doctor Strange, the final script still pulls heavily from the character as inspiration. The next attempt would be made by David Goyer, writer of Blade and future writer of Batman Begins. After being hired by Columbia, Goyer would stick closely to the character's origin, a selfish, materialistic man who finds redemption after traveling to Tibet and studying under a mystic. His version leaned heavily into horror, portraying characters like Mordo and Dormammu in a much more Lovecraftian light. Blade director Stephen Norrington was even attached to direct, reuniting him with Goyer. However, after the success of Blade, studios began scrambling to option anything with a Marvel or DC label, assuming they could turn cheaper to acquire lesser-known heroes like the Daywalker into massive franchises like Spider-Man and Superman. Unfortunately, execs often had little understanding of the characters they optioned, and when Goyer turned in his script, Columbia's execs told him that while they loved it, they wanted him to take the magic out, to which Goyer replied, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you wanted Doctor Strange, but I guess you wanted Dr. Mundane." As a result of that comment, Goyer would be fired the next day. Eventually, Dimension and Miramax would acquire the rights from Columbia, as Goyer would once again be hired to not only write, but also direct. Goyer wanted to start a script over from scratch, and use as many practical effects and in-camera tricks as possible to achieve all of the magic in the film. Unfortunately for him, the project would languish in development, as he dropped out. By the late 2000s, Marvel was finally in a position it had never been in before. After years of licensing out its characters to different studios, Marvel began reacquiring the rights to several of its properties and made a major shift, forming Marvel Studios to finance and self-produce its own films. Instead of selling off individual heroes, they now had the ability to build something themselves. Around this time, Neil Gaiman, a best-selling author and comic writer best known for The Sandman and American Gods, contacted Marvel about developing a Doctor Strange film, with Guillermo del Toro attached as a potential director. Their take leaned heavily into the character's origins, drawing directly from the style of Steve Ditko. One of their key ideas was to push Strange's story back in time, having him become a disbarred surgeon and alcoholic in the 1920s, before discovering the mystic arts in the 30s and training to become the world's greatest magician, before settling down in Greenwich Village for decades, unchanged and largely unnoticed. The goal was to make him feel completely out of time, like a figure who had been quietly existing in the background for nearly a century, but the project never moved forward. At the time, Marvel was focused on building out its core lineup, characters like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, while lesser-known, more unconventional characters like Doctor Strange were pushed further down the line. Eventually, Marvel Studios began the Marvel Writers Project, hiring writers to develop scripts for lesser-known characters, including Doctor Strange. By the time the film finally began moving forward at Marvel, it had become one of the most sought-after directing jobs the studio had ever offered, with more filmmakers lobbying for it than any of their previous films. Among them was Scott Derrickson, a director known for horror films like The Exorcism of Emily Rose and Sinister, someone with a clear handle on the supernatural. But instead of just pitching his take, Derrickson went much further. He put together concept art, storyboards, and even an animatic sequence inspired inspired by the comic Doctor Strange the Oath, centered on a fight in the astral plane, while Doctor struggled to save Strange's physical body in the hospital. That pitch is ultimately what set him apart as Marvel officially chose Derrickson to direct, with his pitch sequence becoming one of the film's central set pieces. Early on, though, Derrickson wanted to use Nightmare as the film's villain, introducing the idea of nightmares as their own dimension, but Kevin Feige pushed back. With the film already introducing the mystic arts, alternate dimensions, and Strange's origin, Feige felt adding a dream dimension would be too much for a single film to handle, and only confuse audiences. Instead, he suggested Dormammu. To play Strange, Marvel, Scott Derrickson, and the writers all had one actor in mind, Benedict Cumberbatch. However, there was a problem. Cumberbatch's schedule made things complicated, forcing Marvel to at least explore other options. The most serious alternative was Joaquin Phoenix, who entered advanced talks for the role. On paper, Phoenix made sense, a high-profile actor with the intensity the character requires, but he was also known for being unpredictable, particularly when it came to long-term commitments. For example, later he nearly dropped out of Joker during development, and more recently walked away from a Todd Haynes film just days before production was set to begin. Ultimately, Phoenix passed on the role, reportedly unwilling to commit to Marvel's multi-picture deal, and in the end, Marvel went back to their original choice, Benedict Cumberbatch, as they would change the film's production schedule to fit around his other commitments. After decades of alternate versions, false starts, and abandoned scripts, Doctor Strange finally made it to the screen. Just one outcome in a timeline full of possibilities. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.